Seeing Lu Sheng's momentum, Hudong below also turned dark-faced, furrowing his brow and squinting, starting to sweat as he formed an opinion. However, Lu Sheng was not someone easily toppled. In the end, he confirmed in his thoughts that his martial instincts advised him to keep his distance from this person as far away as possible. As Lu Sheng stepped onto the podium, he pressed his lips together and shot a cold glare at the crowd behind him, his brow furrowing and exuding a threatening aura. Immediately after, Zhao Taiyan stepped onto the podium and welcomed everyone to the 7th martial saint. The students below also fell silent. Next, he began to speak at length about various philosophies, while the students beneath began to slouch and doze off. Zhao Taiyan's voice rang out again. Students, you have worked hard in your studies, while Lu Sheng, standing beside, raised his hand to plug his 2 fingers into his ears, his eyes filled with disdain as he furrowed his brow and remarked inwardly, no matter which world, the school leaders all say the same thing. Then Zhao Taiyan, full of enthusiasm, smiled and extended his hand toward Lu Sheng, introducing him. Next, we invite your representative for this year's new students. He announced loudly, Ascending Dragon Martial Poinsettia, student Lu Sheng will represent the new students to give a speech. Let's give him a warm welcome. Hearing this, Lu Sheng promptly stood on the podium, leaned down onto the microphone with his hand, and looked up at the students above. Next to him, Zhao Taiyan clasped his hands behind him, smiling with squinted eyes in a refined manner. Below, Su Jianfei narrowed his eyes. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted mockingly, Awaha! The students around also took the opportunity to disgust and shout in disdain. Seeing this, Lu Sheng glanced at him with wide eyes, full of dissatisfaction. Beside him, Zhao Taiyan spoke up to remind the students to be quiet. Then he turned to Lu Sheng with a friendly expression, smiling as he asked, Are you ready? Lu Sheng looked back at him, his face calm, and smiled as he confirmed, I've been preparing all day, there won't be any problems. Hearing him, Zhao Taiyan looked puzzled and asked, Preparing all day? Then he thought to himself, I didn't expect him to care about such small matters, he really knows how to save face for me. He then confirmed, it seems he's not the kind of arrogant genius. Apart from martial artists, he doesn't ignore anything. Right after that, Lu Sheng lowered his gaze at the microphone on the podium, gripping the edge of the lectern without saying anything. Next, Lu Sheng narrowed his eyes, glanced at the crowd, smirking and exuding a murderous aura. Below, a bald man squinted at Lu Sheng with disdain and asked, What does that kid want to say? Next to him, Tu Jianfei also squinted and observed, grinding his teeth as he affirmed, Ha! No matter what he says, we will laugh and shout together later to embarrass him as he goes down. Then, Lu Sheng smiled calmly down at the crowd and announced, I am Lu Sheng, and I know many of you here do not like me. In the next moment, he raised his index finger, his face serious as he confidently declared, So today, I will give those people a chance. Hearing this, the crowd below, including the bald man, stared wide-eyed at Lu Sheng. Whispers began to emerge. Tu Jianfei squinted at Lu Sheng, grinding his teeth as he wondered internally, a chance. Then he frowned, glared, and shouted challengingly into the microphone at the crowd below. Right now, I challenge anyone here. Following that, he spread his arms and further proclaimed, Oh, I even allow all of you. Hearing this, Zhao Taiyan beside him was directly startled, his face full of fierce energy as he grinned sinisterly, extending his hand to exert pressure on the crowd and shouted, Come up here together. Lu Sheng's expression was full of disdain as he smiled, furrowing his brow and glaring with interest at the students, his body radiating energy as he urged, Don't keep me waiting long, a bunch of flies. Hearing this, the bald man quickly cracked his knuckles, gritted his teeth, and furrowed his brows, looking towards Lu Sheng. Su Jianfei next to him was no better, his face contorted with anger as he gnashed his teeth at Lu Sheng. Zhao Taiyan was completely bewildered, his hair seemingly wanting to fly off his head as he leaned to look at Lu Sheng, his mind racing, muttering, What the hell? Then he quickly regained his composure, adjusted his glasses, and forced a smile at Lu Sheng while inwardly shouting, What? Is this what a day of preparation amounts to? Meanwhile, Lu Sheng still had his arms extended on the podium, looking at the students. Zhao Taiyan again yelled in his mind, Is that it? In the end, these 4 statements are just meant to show off their strength. Below, the crowd stared wide-eyed at Lu Sheng, especially Lin Zhe, who raised his trembling hand, gave a thumbs up wide-eyed and shaking, praising, Indeed, Brother Shang deserves to be our leader. So impressive. Next, Lu Sheng tilted his head, squinted, and smiled arrogantly while looking down at the crowd. What's the matter? Is no one brave enough to come up? He then asked them, Are you all just a bunch of useless flies? Hearing this, the students quickly pushed themselves up from their seats, their faces twisted with anger as they glared at Lu Sheng. especially Xu Jianfi, who slammed his hand on the table and shouted an insult. "You bastard." Next to him, the bald classmate looked at him in shock, eyes wide. Xu Jianfi shouted his conclusion. "You've gotten too arrogant, Lu Sheng." Immediately after that, he stood up fully armored and punched his chest with his fist. The aura around his body began to radiate. Looking towards Lu Sheng, he smirked and shouted a challenge. "Let Xu Jianfi show you what he's made of." Next, the group behind him quickly started to chatter and mock. "Do you really think you're invincible?" "Ha ha, not at all." As for Xu Jianfi, he clenched his fist tightly, cracking his knuckles while looking up at Lu Sheng with a smug smile. Beside him, a bald guy widened his eyes towards Lu Sheng, hands in his pockets, and remarked, "It's been a long time since someone had the guts to say such bragging words in front of me." A girl also stood up from there, playing with her long white hair with one hand and resting her other hand on her hip, frowning and smiling as she declared, "Coincidentally, I also want to test my skills and expand my knowledge a bit." She then continued, "I wonder what the true strength of the ascending dragon martial poinsettia really is." Beside her, a boy gaped at her in surprise. Seeing this, Hudon also frowned, pursed his lips, and thought, "Oh no, this atmosphere." He remarked in his mind, "My instincts tell me this is not a smart choice." The green-haired guy next to him also frowned, squinting at Hudon, observing his uneasy actions. Soon after, another student stood up. Hudon thought, "But if I don't stand up now, everyone will think I'm afraid of Lu Sheng." Thinking of this, he squinted his eyes and resolutely stood up to look at Lu Sheng, mumbling then. The group behind him quickly stood up, full of excitement. Hudon remarked, "Please enlighten us, ascending dragon scholar." The other students also hurriedly stood up, looking at Lu Sheng unfriendly, preparing for a fight. Soon, the entire auditorium was fixed on Lu Sheng on the stage. Below, an aura quickly formed into the shape of a dragon, its momentum roaring towards Lu Sheng. The crowd moving towards Lu Sheng shouted, "Please enlighten us." Seeing this, another teacher at the back widened his eyes and looked towards Zhao Taiyan, hurriedly asking, "What's going on here, Vice Principal?" Hearing this, he also turned dark, signaling for everyone to stop. Then, with a calm expression as if watching a play, he looked at Lu Sheng, frowning to confirm, "No rush. Let's see how this unfolds first." Only Lindsay stood at the bottom, glaring at the group, clenching his fists, frowning and shouting with righteousness in support of Lu Sheng. "Son of a bitch, are you trying to bully the few with the many? If you're capable, come up here." Seeing this, Lu Sheng on the stage glanced down at him, somewhat surprised. Meanwhile, Lindsay thought to himself, "Damn, if he doesn't get beaten up, it'll be a near-death fight for sure." After pausing for a moment, he continued thinking, "Even if Brother Sheng is strong, he can't take on so many people. I can't let him lose face." Below, the coiled dragon Oro was still watching Lu Sheng. Meanwhile, Lu Sheng quickly stood up at the podium and spoke, originally. Hearing this, Lindsay also turned to look at Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng continued, "A pile of trash gathered together can put some pressure on people, right?" Then, his face darkened, and his red eyes exuded killing intent as he shouted, "Just right, I also want to see." Lu Sheng interrupted, then extended his arms, releasing his demonic aura toward the dragon, causing it to retreat and scream, "You bunch of trash, on what basis do you think you have the right to sit in the same place as me?" Immediately after, without any wasted movements, Lu Sheng jumped up, darting forward in an instant. As he charged, he prepared to throw a punch at Xu Jianfi while confirming, "You are the first." He didn't have time to react, staring wide-eyed at Lu Sheng, his face contorted as he braced for the punch, his body still armored. His arm blocked in front of him, he strained to look at Lu Sheng, coughing violently. Cough, cough. Then Lu Sheng threw a punch. He quickly flew back several dozen meters, crashing into the wall behind. The surrounding students gaped in fear at Lu Sheng. Shortly after, another person also kicked toward Lu Sheng, but Lu Sheng quickly reached out to block the kick midair. The hand shot out to strike the other person's palm while narrowing the eyes to glance at him. The body radiated a murderous aura and voiced him emanating from his palm. Soon after, Lu Sheng grabbed his face, causing him to panic. The fire began to fade, replaced by sharp sparks aimed at him. In response to Lu Sheng's quickness, the man furrowed his brow, eyes wide with shock, unable to speak. The flames clinging to Lu Sheng quickly dissipated. Lu Sheng looked at his burning clothes with one hand, squinting with a hint of sadness as he confirmed, "So that's how it is." Then he stated, "Staunch spirit isn't fully concealed. The clothes are singed a bit." Right after that, Lu Sheng glanced to the side, furrowing his brow. A beam of light quickly shot towards Lu Sheng's arm. Lu Sheng also retracted his hand, scowling as he looked down while the guy with the fire fell backward. Immediately after, streams of powerful light rapidly swept towards Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng also bent his body to dodge them. A girl moved quickly like the wind with white hair, furrowing her brows and holding a knife, glanced at Lu Sheng and smiled, thinking, a powerful force, absolute defense. Then she decided, then I'll use the speed from your flesh. But before she could react, Lu Sheng dashed out from behind in a flash, grabbing the girl's leg, causing her to widen her eyes in astonishment. He used the skill of exchanging the breath of the wind. Next, the girl, wide-eyed and panicked, trembled and shouted, "What?" Her body was gradually being knocked down and soon was thrown toward the ceiling, while Lu Sheng furrowed his brow and gracefully landed on the ground. In front of Lu Sheng, a group of people was fighting while behind him. A girl's body emitted killing intent as she bent down, trembling, and said, "I'm about to lose control of my strength." Immediately after, her body shot sharp arrows towards Lu Sheng, her hands clenched tightly as she shouted, "Don't blame me." Next, Lu Sheng's back was quickly pierced by those darts. Lu Sheng had no time to react, turning around to look with a bit of shock, wide-eyed. The girl saw Lu Sheng hit by the darts, his clothes torn and blood starting to flow, and she clenched her fists excitedly, looking at Lu Sheng and shouted, "We did it." Then she announced, "I've dealt with him. I took care of Lu." Meanwhile, Lu Sheng regained his composure, glanced at her, and quickly used his strength to pull out the darts stuck in his back. Lu Sheng's face showed some displeasure. Immediately after, he spread his arms to adjust the darts that were sticking out of his back, turned to look at the girdle and asked, "Who gave you permission? You scratched my back without asking." Seeing this, she panicked, raised her hands to shield herself, taking a step back. Lu Sheng's gaze was as if he wanted to kill her, glaring at her. He spread his arms to control the darts, looking furious. The girl then shouted in fear, "No way! How can you be a spirit thoughtmaster too?" Then, Lu Sheng swiftly shot the darts, pinning the girl's body against the wall, her face full of fear, turning pale in shock as she screamed, "Oh no!" The group of students led by Hu Dong also yelled and charged towards Lu Sheng in anger. Damn! Everyone rushed in together. In the next moment, the group of people rushed forward from behind, weapons in hand, charging at him. Lu Sheng calmly turned to look at them, his eyes filled with a hint of disdain. He then extended his hand, his gaze fixated on them with a mixture of disgust and frowning displeasure. Finally, a loud explosion rang out, and the students who rushed in were quickly thrown back. Seeing their weakness, Lu Sheng stomped his foot on the ground, looking at the pathetic group who stared back in fear. He declared, "Indeed, that there's nothing interesting about you. Trash remains trash, and a pile of trash is still just trash." Next, Lu Sheng clenched one hand, his body radiating an aura, stepping on a sword stuck in the ground. With a look of disappointment, he spoke amidst the dust. "Ha ha ha! I had held too many hopes for you all." On the other side, a teacher who had tried to intervene widened his eyes in shock and yelled, "This is really..." Beside him, Zhao Taiyan stood frozen, eyes wide and brow furrowed as he looked at Lu Sheng in astonishment. Then he regained his composure, furrowing his brow and squinting with a hopeful smile as he thought, "This is truly promising." Next, he looked at Lu Sheng, who was restoring his clothes and body, calmly dusting himself off while confirming inwardly, "I eagerly anticipate the day those 6 martial saints see me." The crowd of Hudong, caught off guard, stared wide-eyed in shock at Lu Sheng. He asked back, trembling with doubt, "How did it end up like this?" The students behind him also looked over, frozen in place. Hudong further confirmed, "I was still thinking about whether I should take action or not when it was already over." Then Lu Sheng stepped over the face of an unconscious student lying on the ground as he walked. Immediately after, his expression darkened, realizing in panic that the warriors' expedition had failed. Finally, he remembered Lu Sheng's menacing and cold gaze directed at the crowd of students as if they were mere trash. Hudong concluded, "The world will welcome the long rule of the Dark Demon King." He imagined the scene of the warriors driving their swords into the ground, bowing towards him with astonished and fearful looks. Back to reality, Lu Sheng stood before him with a confused look, eyes wide as he waved his hand and called out, "Hey." At that moment, Hudong regained his composure, his entire body stiffening as he looked at Lu Sheng. Seeing this, Lu Sheng reflected internally, "Why are you frozen?" And there's also a familiar animated line from the old world. Then Lu Sheng asked him, "You stood up just now, right?" Upon hearing this, Hudong's face turned pale, trembling, and he stared in shock at Lu Sheng. Finally, shaking as if his neck might break, he spoke in denial, "No." Next, he turned around to look at the distance between himself and the chair, which was now farther away, and forced a smile as an idea popped into his head. Ultimately, he awkwardly grinned at Lu Sheng while lifting the chair to place it under him and shouted in justification, "I don't have it. Absolutely not. Am I not sitting here?" Seeing this, Lu Sheng stared at him with wide eyes and calmly confirmed, "It's too late now. Nothing can be overlooked. He didn't forget to reach out and tap the back of the boy's head, causing Hudong to scream in pain. Ah! Immediately after, with the chaos all around and no one daring to step up anymore, Lu Sheng calmly stated, I already gave you a chance, but unfortunately, you didn't seize it. Then Lu Sheng pointed down at the ground, squinted, and frowned at the crowd, declaring, Once these people wake up, tell them not to stroll in front of me again. Do you understand? Seeing this, the others quickly forced awkward smiles and bowed their heads, nodding like chickens pecking at grain in confirmation. Understood, understood. They nodded continuously. After that, Lu Sheng quickly turned his head back and smiled, casually announcing, Vice Principal, my speech representing the new students is finished. Hearing this, Zhao Taiyan also excitedly opened his arms towards Lu Sheng, smiling with satisfaction and shouted to confirm, Good. He then announced, keep a few students to clean up the auditorium, and those who need to go to the infirmary should be taken there. Finally, he made the announcement, the others can disperse. The opening ceremony for the 57th cohort of new students of Martial St. Vilaya concluded successfully. Through a series of supernatural manipulations, the strongest new student in history dominated the freshman ranking, taking on 1 against 100. Lu Sheng was imagined as a monster fighting against a group of new students. Continuous commentary rang out. The strength of Lu Sheng's ascending dragon martial poinsettia shines brilliantly. Lu Sheng was compared to and illustrated on a martial arts chart. The commentator remembered the students who were lost in sweet dreams and reminded, on the second day of enrollment, the sword ranking of the senior students. If you are still lazing around, you should strive harder. Next, the analytical diagrams quickly displayed on the screen. 6th level martial artist plus a 3rd level spirit thought master. A comprehensive analysis of Lu Sheng's strength with ascending dragon martial poinsettia. Finally, a closing statement of the news echoed. The strongest new star of Martial St. VA has emerged. Then the symbol rang out. Lu Sheng's actions are like a rock thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples. Images of the water tank and the splashing droplets followed. At present, Lu Sheng was drinking water while pressing the TV remote, his face scrunched up as he gritted his teeth and remarked, These headlines all make it sound like I'm some kind of boss who got lost in a beginner's village. He muttered to himself, Am I really that kind of person? Next, Lu Sheng looked up again, his face full of contemplation as he thought to himself, But it's true, recently I have become increasingly more violent. It seems I have gotten used to using brute force to solve everything. He questioned again, Could it be? Because my strength has increased too rapidly. Then he answered himself, That must be part of the reason. Next, Lu Sheng confirmed to himself that the most important reason is that those weaklings are truly too weak. After that, he likened the experience. Interacting with the new students brings no pressure at all. It feels like mowing the lawn. He imagined himself calmly holding a lawnmower, cutting down the grass represented by the students. Then he concluded in his thoughts, being weak is not a crime, but being weak and not even realizing it is indeed a mistake. Finally, he squinted his eyes and looked grimly at the crowd cheering around the chessboard, raising his glass of water to his face and added, Being weak and bothering others is even more wrong. Finally, it was pointed out that while violence cannot solve all problems, it can solve most of them. Lu Sheng tightened his grip until the glass of water in his hand shattered, narrowing his brows while smiling to himself with a sense of enlightenment. Divine Illumination King Sutra, Stellar Development, Natural Breathing Method. Then he proudly shouted in his heart, I originally intended to quickly enhance the authority of the Fire Seed Resource Repository through holy manifestation. After that, he interrupted himself, finally staring in astonishment at his hand as 2 streams of red and green aura intertwined, and shouted in his heart, I should have revealed my talent and further confirmed that perhaps it was because of wanting to seize this opportunity that the willpower in his mind suddenly began to relax a bit, leading to a breakthrough in his martial will. Soon after, he further confirmed that he should send someone on their way now. In his mind, amidst the fierce ice and fire battle, Lu Sheng grimaced and gritted his teeth, shouting, Come here. Immediately, he quickly rushed toward Zhao Lingquan, who was shielding herself under the ice arena, using his feet for momentum while holding his weapon defensively. Next, she repeatedly thrust her weapon toward him, and Lu Sheng swiftly dodged them, charging forward. His fist swung, and she raised her shield to block Lu Sheng's upward strike, while he delivered a powerful series of punches that shattered the spear. Zhao Lingquan faced the blow directly, and her spear quickly lunged toward Lu Sheng's neck, leaving his face dark and expressionless. Finally, using the speed of light and the breath of the wind, he circled back toward Zhao Lingquan, dodging her attack. Then, Lu Sheng raised his hand to launch his weapon, his hand decisive, his face scrunched up as he shouted, Using the Divine Illumination King Sutra, my spiritual power increases tenfold, glass light method. The weapon quickly shot up toward her. Zhao Lingquan was struck on the shoulder by the weapon, and in pain, she opened her mouth to scream, while Lu Sheng shouted excitedly, "I finally won." Her arm was severed, and blood gushed out laboriously. Her teeth gritted as she sweated. Next, her arm quickly sprouted a huge chunk of ice. Zhao Lingquan's body ached as she knelt on the ice. It seemed she was in pain, shedding tears, trembling as she looked up. Seeing this, Lu Sheng also squinted, his face darkening in panic as he shouted back, "Oh shit, you can do that too?" Zhao Lingquan's arm quickly reformed with stronger steel, and she punched herself up to stand, smirking. Soon after, a sharp arm plunged into the ground, causing it to crack. Then, she lifted a block of ice from the ground 100 times larger than her body. The arm beneath held up the massive block of ice as she raised it high, looking toward Lu Sheng. Immediately, she melted into the sharp ice, spreading her arms out, while Lu Sheng stood below, looking up, unable to contain himself, swearing, "Holy shit." Finally, stammering and panicking, Lu Sheng shouted in questioning, "Damn, I've never seen her use this move." Next, Lu Sheng further confirmed, "Could it be the ultimate move of the final state after the bloodline has dropped to a certain level?" Above Lu Sheng's head, a large ice phoenix formed from magic looked down at him, while Lu Sheng also raised his head to gaze at it. Immediately he frowned, eyes wide, his body emanating a strong aura that he wielded. "Will of the Master!" Lu Sheng raised 2 fingers and clasped them together, shouting, "Sword timeless argument." With his weapon released, Lu Sheng floated and pointed towards the bird above him. His weapons whirled around his body, creating a vortex. Lu Sheng yelled the name of his technique. The martial world is reborn. Then it quickly rushed toward the large ice bird in front of Lu Sheng. Behind it was a magical circle. Above, Zhao Lingquan also smiled excitedly, watching Lu Sheng while he gritted his teeth, staring back at her. Their eyes wide, they shouted in unison, "Charge!" After the direct attack, Lu Sheng collapsed and sat on the ground, his body frozen in spots as he bowed his head and coughed hoarsely. Cough, cough. Next, his face tightened with fatigue as he looked at his frozen hand and asked himself, "Ha ha ha! Am I losing again?" Then, Lu Sheng reflected on martial arts. Damn it, this is real martial arts. Before Lu Sheng, Zhao Lingquan was pointing her weapon directly at his face with a thick wall of sharp ice behind her and a layer of ice beneath their feet. Lu Sheng looked up, kneeling on the ground, gazing at her, and finally closed his eyes in exhaustion, exhaling, "In the end, I still can't defeat you," he confirmed. She opened her mouth as if to say something but remained silent. The snow around them continued to fall, and soon after, she smiled. The mask on her face quickly cracked, looking at Lu Sheng tenderly. Then, her body transformed into ice and gradually melted away. Seeing this, Lu Sheng widened his eyes in astonishment. Zhao Lingquan began to fall slowly. Her hand holding the weapon was quickly dropped and fell. Immediately after, Lu Sheng's body also started to glow, pulling in streams of black light. Lu Sheng stared at it in shock, unable to react, and finally asked himself, "What? Is this her memory?" Next, Lu Sheng watched a younger Zhao Lingquan, shy and frowning, clutching the hem of her dress, unable to look directly. Beside her, someone reached out to her and announced, "Teacher, we brought someone here. The girl's name is Zhao Lingquan." Hearing this, the person on the other side quickly responded, he said while carving a small chunk of ice into the shape of a bird. "Not bad talent." Next, he squinted his eyes, turned his head kindly to look at Zhao Lingquan, and confirmed, "From now on, you are a retreat disciple of our ice and snow martial arts." Then came the harsh training. Zhao Lingquan sat in the freezing glacier, her whole body curled up and shivering as she hugged herself, her face wrinkled up in a whimper. Ah. Outside Jia Ling, he was crossing her arms, looking at her and asked, "Tell me, what do you want to learn?" Hearing this, she also frowned, raised her head, still hugging her knees, and shouted in response, "I want the lance of the master." Then Zhao Lingquan further explained, because the strongest weapon of the master is the lance. He is a powerful figure, the only one in base number 1359 to comprehend the 5 realms of the lance. Upon hearing this, Jia Ling looked at her attentively and then burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. Time passed quickly, and Zhao Lingquan had grown up. She held her weapon and stood on the podium before the excited crowd cheering below. "Master, Zhao Lingquan has broken through to master, a master at 17 years old. In this life, she has hopes of reaching level 10. Our base number, 1359, has gained another martial arts genius at the master level." Before the pride, she smiled at Jia Ling, excitedly calling, "Teacher." Hearing this, he closed his eyes, crossed his arms, and smiled, then shook his head and opened his eyes to say, "You are still far from being good enough." Next, he turned around and waved at her, reminding, Your cold energy has not yet explored the true strength of ice and snow. Upon hearing this, Zhao Lingquan tightened her grip on the weapon in her hand, looking towards him. Then, in a house, a hand pushed the door open with great difficulty. Inside, Zhao Lingquan was seriously cultivating or was distracted by the noise and turned to the door, asking, "Who?" The person outside, with a pained expression, furrow of his brows, struggling against the wall, his body full of wounds, painfully holding his arm, and bitterly called Zhao Lingquan. He then announced, "The city's base has been destroyed. What are you still doing here in your hard practice?" Finally scolding, "Your heart's blood is also made of ice." Ha ha. Outside was a scene of devastation. Hearing this, Zhao Lingquan lost her composure, turned around, stood up with effort, and shouted, "What? Where is the teacher?" In response, the person on the other side managed to rise towards her, bowed his head, smiled bitterly to confirm, "The teacher is dead." He then stated, "The teacher was also a madman." Before he left, he said not to disturb you. Upon hearing that, she remained calm and stepped outside, confirming, "Is that so?" The other person also stared wide-eyed at her actions. Next, Zhao Lingquan put on a blindfold, her gaze filled with regret as she remarked, "The teacher is dead, so I'll go to die too." She held the lance, standing before the monster outside that was wreaking havoc, and stated, "It's a pity. I could have let the teacher know in time." Immediately after, she charged at the beast, the icy aura on her body quickly revealing itself as she punched the creature on its head, mumbling, "My aura has just uncovered the ice and snow." Returning to reality, Lu Sheng hugged his head while closing his eyes tightly, painfully, and desperately shouting, "Ah, ah, ha, ha." Shortly after, he began to gasp for air. Ha, 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 ha. Kneeling on the ground, one eye closed and the other open, gritting his teeth, the black aura gradually dissipated as he noted. Spear technique, way of the spear. He had never absorbed a fragment of memory like this before. This time, most of it was related to the lance. Soon, Lu Sheng clenched his fist, his eyes wide with astonishment as he frowned and shouted in thought. The martial arts treasure of Zhao Lingquan had truly upgraded him immensely. His spear technique, which had already reached the entry level, absorbed the fragment of martial arts memory like ice and snow, ultimately confirming he had surpassed the senior control realm, reaching a completely new and higher level, the 4th rank of spear technique. In Lu Sheng's mind, only disjointed images of Zhao Lingquan's techniques filled his thoughts. Lu Sheng stood up, looking at them and concluding in his mind, there is a gap between masters. If Shi Sheng Ning's memory were a ball full of impurities, then Zhao Lingquan's memory is a piece of transparent ice. Although Zhao Lingquan only reached level 7 before her death, she is undoubtedly a 100% martial arts genius, even capable of challenging beyond level 8, much stronger than Shi Sheng Ning. Next, Lu Sheng turned his head around in shock, reaching out to a picture in front of him and stating, even Shi Sheng Ning left behind core master techniques. Zhao Lingquan is 10 times stronger than Shi Sheng Ning, and his martial will is also immensely stronger, so there must be some core master techniques that remain. Finally, Lu Sheng looked up at a crystal ball, a bright smile of excitement on his face as he shouted, "I found it. This is the core memory of Zhao Lingquan, the remaining master will." Immediately afterward, Lu Sheng reached out toward the crystal ball, which began to crack open, revealing the light within. The light quickly absorbed into his body, astonishing Lu Sheng. His eyes widened brightly, and he couldn't help but shout in his thoughts, "So that's it. This is the breath of the ice star." Then Lu Sheng swung his hand, and a lance appeared, resembling the image of Zhao Lingquan behind him. In the end, Lu Sheng emulated her as he swung the spear. A gigantic iceberg was quickly summoned. It opened its eyes and looked at him. Lu Sheng shouted excitedly in his thoughts, "This lance is called." He paused. After that, recalling the image in Zhao Lingquan's memory of the frozen monsters, he shouted inwardly, "Frost-piercing prison spear." Then, reflecting further in his thoughts, this lance could cut down a grandmaster. Next was the dreamscape the following day, where Lu Sheng leaned against a corner of the wall, looking at each red system panel, his hands seemingly searching for something. Finally, while reading the information about the people in the dreamscape, he made a comment. Zhao Lingquan, level 10 martial artist, mystic spear path, creator of frost-piercing prison spear, lost in the battle of base number 1359. Zhao Lingquan, level 7 martial artist, spear technique genius, disciple of Zhao Lingquan, lost in the battle at base number 1359. Seeing their information like that, Lu Sheng laughed excitedly, grinning, clenched his fist, and shouted, "That old man turned out to be a level 10 powerhouse, and frost-piercing prison spear is so powerful. Yet it's not in the Fire Sea plan." Then he read with increasing excitement and shouted, "If the spear skill were included in the Fire Sea plan, how strong it would be." Next, Lu Sheng recognized something and shouted in his thoughts, "Oh, wait, cultivating 3 level 11 martial arts at the same time, my energy is nearly reaching its limit." Then he closed his eyes tightly, furrowed his brows painfully while sweating profusely, and noted, "Anyway, my innate martial arts skills are not inherently that strong. They rely entirely on the accumulation of 10,000 years to reach the height I am at now." Right after that, Lu Sheng recalled the scene where he comprehended the spear technique of Zhao Lingquan and added his thoughts. The foundational combat techniques must be personally experienced step by step, but martial skills do not require that. Ultimately, it is confirmed that the dreamscape space is an unparalleled treasure for me. What I need to do is to continue inheriting their ultimate skills by hunting the powerful zombies, just like Zhao Lingquan. After that, Lu Sheng looked at Zhai Linghe on the system and confirmed. Then the next target is to hunt Zhai Linghe. Lu Sheng glanced at a tall building exuding a gloomy killing intent and thought, "No, this is too difficult." Then he explained further. Although his martial arts memory can be said to be the existence of a powerful pinnacle, Zhai Linghe's position is at the core of the main base. I can finally confirm that I can sense it. There are countless terrifying auras powerful enough to make me tremble. The difficulty is too high, and I still have a long way to go. Suddenly, his head spun, his eyes widened in pain as he clenched his teeth, and then he clutched his chest and screamed, "Ah!" In the pain, his whole body curled up, and white spots began to appear on his body. He then grimaced and shouted, "This is the will of my master colliding with each other. My body is starting to emit 2 streams of hot and cold heat simultaneously." Finally, Lu Sheng grimaced, closed his eyes tightly, and gritted his teeth, shouting in confusion, "What is happening?" Next, he used the glass wall technique. Then, Lu Sheng delved into his own mind, one side being a swirling ice sphere, while the other side was a low, fiery body trying to assert its presence. Lu Sheng floated in space, startled as he looked at these 2 states. Then, Lu Sheng's eyes widened with worry as he stared at the conflicting auras and shouted anxiously, "The will of the master Zhao Lingquan is ice. Her will is ice. The eternal master Shi Sheng Ning's will is fire. Fire and ice are incompatible. If not handled properly, I fear my body will be destroyed. So what should I do?" Immediately afterward, the dormant fiery body began to crack from the top of the head, light bursting forth. Next, the power of ice was drawn into it, while the body absorbed fire into its chest. After absorbing everything, Lu Sheng's dormant body quickly illuminated with a violet glow, and finally, intense energy began to flow from his forehead. The techniques quickly emerged. Under this situation, Lu Sheng stared wide-eyed in astonishment and shouted in his thoughts, "This is the legendary peak form, recorded in the glass wall technique, and it can absorb the will of the master. This really could save my life. If I can completely build a perfect human form of golden radiant stone, then how many types of master wills can my body accommodate? Perhaps the more the better?" Next, Lu Sheng's eyes widened as he shouted, "Wait!" Then the images of various wills began to appear. Lu Sheng expressed doubt in his thoughts. Isn't my master will just the combination of the wills of a bunch of powerhouses merged into the final master will? Lu Sheng's body began to glow, his fists clenched, and he frowned. One hand was placed on his chest, while the other was raised vaguely. His face darkened as he shouted internally. The martial arts gradually advanced towards perfection, and the will imprints began to shine. The next morning on the academy's path, Lindsay was running after Lu Sheng while stating, "Brother Sheng, you can be considered super hot right now. The students are all suggesting putting you on the old student list." Meanwhile, Lu Sheng walked along calmly and replied, "Just a little fame, that's all." Hearing Lu Sheng say that, Lindsay also smiled widely and reached out his hand towards him, stating, "For you, it's nothing, right? Ha ha, also, today, you will have to choose a cold weapon for your main training." He then asked, "What weapon are you planning to choose? I'll pick the same one when the time comes." Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng glanced at him calmly. Finally, Lu Sheng turned his face, shook his head, and walked away, while Lindsay beside him was taken aback, wide-eyed at Lu Sheng's action and waiting for an answer. Lu Sheng raised his hand to stroke his chin, frowned, and seriously confirmed, "I guess I will choose Lance." Hearing that, he clasped his hands together with Lu Sheng and smiled with delight, excitedly yelling, "Really? My first choice is also Lance." Swords and weapons felt light as a fly swatter, then flattered, still the king of cold weapons. Seeing this, Lu Sheng continued to walk calmly, hands in his pockets, and asked him, "Do you really want to learn spear technique like me? That's fine, but you might not see me much." Lindsay was startled and looked back at Lu Sheng, saying, "What? What does that mean?" After that, they arrived at the martial arts classroom. A group of students was sitting quietly in their seats, focused on the projector in front of the lectern, while Lu Sheng leisurely squinted, hands in his pockets as he walked into the classroom. Behind him, Lindsay was still following along, happily smiling. The students, along with Hu Dong, looked up at Lu Sheng in fear, their faces turning pale. He confirmed to himself that from that day on, Hu Dong interrupted, and Lu Sheng quickly sat down in his seat. Below, he trembled with fear, his face darkened, bowing his head and not daring to look directly at Lu Sheng. Finally, Hu Dong sank into a state of despairing thoughts, feeling a sense of helplessness and hopelessness as he could not resist. He imagined himself as a tiny being tossed into a gigantic glass of water, struggling to escape. Hu Dong further concluded that even in his dreams, he felt trapped in a glass of water, surrounded by an indomitable flood where he couldn't surface. He gasped for air, his face contorted and distorted as he punched the sides of the glass, desperately wanting to escape. His thoughts screamed helplessly, unable to do anything, only able to struggle until he was gradually engulfed by coldness and despair, and then he woke up. Each night, he awoke in that terrifying dream, his pale face filled with panic, his eyes wide open. Hu Dong shouted in his thoughts, "Does that dream repeat itself so many times? Is ascending dragon really that terrifying?" Then he questioned himself. Next, he looked up at Lu Sheng with fearful eyes, realizing that the source of the terror was not the ascending dragon martial poinsettia, but him. He then mumbled Lu Sheng's name under his breath, his gaze filled with fear as he looked at Lu Sheng sitting in front of him. Just then, at the door, a woman with long orange hair entered, holding a ruler in one hand while placing the other on her hip. "I am a professor specializing in the study of strange creatures. My name is Tsu Sin," she added. "Before you begin your 4 years of martial arts training, I am here today to teach you a lesson." Immediately after that, she stood at the podium looking down at the group of students and confirmed. "First, I will explain something why we must train in cold weapons and martial arts instead of already having a certain foundation in technology of hot weapons." Then she put her hands on her hips, struck the ruler hard on the board to remind the students, "You all should look at this." Immediately, a documentary about gun warfare was quickly projected. Soldiers holding guns were continuously firing forward. Then there were images of huge, ferocious monsters warring on the other side of the soldiers. Next were images of bullets shooting towards the strange creatures, while they had a bulletproof shield. Tsu Sin's voice reminded, "That is because human hot weapons have no effect on the strange creatures at all." Seeing this, the students quickly widened their eyes and looked up to discuss. But why? Lindsay above also watched while frowning and remarked, "Since I was young, my father taught me that only martial arts can resist strange creatures, never mentioning this. Why is that?" Lu Sheng beside him also frowned, crossed his arms, and did not respond, but his eyes were filled with resolve as he understood everything. Lu Sheng shouted in his thoughts, "Because of the rules." The teacher above also lowered the stick she was holding and looked at the group of students. The projection had turned off, and she began to explain, "That is because of the rules. Humans have been confronting strange creatures for over 300 years, and until now have not stopped exploring and researching the origins of the strange creatures. Although there are no answers, there is one point that can be confirmed about these strange creatures," she interrupted. After that, it was confirmed that it came from another world, a large circle in the sky, where the strange creatures kept rushing out. Next, Tsu Sin pointed the stick at her heart while placing her hands on her hips, looking at the students and explaining, "So it is not us who choose martial arts, but martial arts that choose us. To survive the invasion of the strange creatures, we can only rely on the power of martial arts." Hearing this, a female student raised her hand in confusion and asked, "Professor Xu, if our firearms are affected by the rules of the other world, does that mean the strange creatures remain as powerful as before when they enter our world, unaffected by anything?" Upon hearing this, she stepped forward, placing her hands on her hips and praised, "Great question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer that for you. I also want to know the answer, or perhaps the answer lies ahead of us as long as we face it." Hearing this, the students expressed their confusion, shouting in unison, "Huh? What do you mean?" Lu Sheng crossed his arms, looking calmly at the teacher, and added, "Because those strange creatures have already been influenced by the rules. They originally..." Lu Sheng interrupted, while the students stared wide-eyed at him. Then, with a serene expression, Lu Sheng supplemented, "Stronger than that." Seeing Lu Sheng's answer, Tsu Sin was somewhat amazed and looked up at Lu Sheng with wide eyes. Next, she raised her hand to hug her waist while adjusting her glasses with the other hand, wide-eyed, smiling, and praising Lu Sheng. "This student has thought about it, hasn't she? Very good, but I am just making a guess." Upon hearing this, the group of students below was also filled with shock and began to murmur in panic. "Impossible? That's not fair." The teacher tilted her head, casually looking at her students and confirming, "That's right, it is indeed not fair." Then she crossed her arms and explained further, "But there are many things in this world that fundamentally have no such thing as fairness. Immediately after, Xu Xin turned around and walked away while confirming with her students, "This is the lesson I wanted to teach you today. Thank you. Class dismissed." Hearing this, Lindsay above was so angry that he glared and held his head, frowning in dissatisfaction as he said, "Damn it, the strange creatures are already incredibly powerful. Have we really been affected? Doesn't that mean the future of humanity is doomed?" Beside him, Lu Sheng glanced at him but did not answer. Then his expression darkened and became serious as he rolled his eyes, confirming in thought, "The future of humanity 10,000 years from now truly is doomed." Meanwhile, Lindsay beside him also lowered his head to the ground, full of fear, wide-eyed, still holding his head. Next, Lu Sheng stood up from his seat and walked down the stairs. The group of students also looked his way. Lu Sheng calmly put his hands in his pockets and thought to himself, "Even if I have the fire seed resources, I can't deal with the strange creatures and martial arts of the year 300 right now." Then Lu Sheng recalled the powerful strange creatures out there and shouted in his mind, "The future ahead seems to hold no hope at all." Immediately, Lu Sheng's eyes widened with determination. His expression darkened as he confirmed in his thoughts, "What I can do is to continuously increase my strength, step by step, seeking hope." Next, outside the classroom, the teacher held some documents and handed a piece of paper to Lu Sheng, reminding him, "In 3 days, please submit this form to me." Hearing this, Lu Sheng reached out to receive it. Lindsay stood beside him, watching them. The teacher then added, "Currently, you can choose different classrooms based on your personal interest to practice various cold weapons." Immediately after, Lu Sheng smiled, turned back to Lindsay behind him, and reminded him, "Let's go to the spear technique classroom." Lindsay tightened his fist, grinned with excitement, and replied to Lu Sheng, "Yes, sir." Soon after, someone in the crowd cupped their hands to make a megaphone and pointed at Lu Sheng, shouting to the group, "I heard it, it's spear technique." Lu Sheng chose that spear technique, paying attention to avoid completely relying on spear technique as his main training weapon. Remember that. The other students reacted with anxious expressions. Seeing this, a student among them, also frightened, spoke up in a pale voice, "What? I have to quickly change my martial arts? I don't want to compete with Lu Sheng." Below, the expression of another person was no better. In the spear technique training room, a group of students were practicing with lances inside, and Lu Sheng, along with Lindsay, walked through the door. Seeing them, one person inside stared at them, his face scrunched up, frowning in surprise and muttering, "It's Lu Sheng, I can't believe he chose spear." Hearing this, someone questioned, "Who is Lu Sheng?" Another person responded, "Haven't you watched the video on the school's website?" Then another person explained, "This year's Ascending Dragon Marshal Poinsettia, the strongest freshman." On the fighting floor, a girl with red hair leaned on a spear with her other hand on her hip, glanced over at the crowd and announced, "All right, everyone can leave class now," she added. "If you want to stay and practice a bit longer, that's fine too." Suddenly, the teacher sensed something and frowned as she glanced over, snorted, and finally pointed at Lu Sheng and Lindsay and called out, "You two, come here." Next, she rested her hands on her hips while gripping the spear, one eye closed as she looked at them and introduced herself. "My name is Lu Sheng, and I have been teaching the cold weapon spear curriculum from the 1st to the 3rd year." She then added, "Today only the 2 of you have come." Seeing this, she looked at the 2 people standing opposite her in the arena and remarked, "All right, you 2 can attack me with the spear first, so I can see what your potential is like." Lu Sheng narrowed his eyes, furrowed his brow, and stepped forward, looking at her with seriousness as he sank into thought. This female teacher had abundant vitality and was a peak 6th level martial arts master. Behind him, Lindsay was still staring blankly at Lu Sheng. Observing this, Lu Sheng quietly assessed Lu Sheng. Is he the Lu Sheng that the students have been talking about recently? Immediately after, she swung the spear, squinting at Lu Sheng as she threw it towards him. Lu Sheng widened his eyes and furrowed his brow, reaching out to grab the lance that was gliding past his shoulder. He then controlled the lance, spinning it a few times before finally wielding the spear backward in a very stable fighting stance. Seeing this, Lu Sheng placed her hands on her hips and praised Lu Sheng. Very good. Noticing this, he also furrowed his brow and smiled at her, confirming that I won't hold back any longer. Be careful, teacher. Seeing this, Lu Sheng also adjusted her neck and smiled, smirking while picking up another lance that she found amusing. "Oh, you told me to be careful." Then she shouted in her thoughts, "Even though I haven't reached the master level yet after researching spear technique for more than 10 years, I am not all weak when facing a master." Finally, she looked at Lu Sheng and remarked, "A new student who just enrolled a few days ago is telling me to be careful." Meanwhile, Lu Sheng quickly used Zhao Lingquan's technique and charged towards Lu Sheng with the spear. Faced with Lu Sheng's cold intensity, the teacher looked at him in shock. Finally, her pupils constricted in horror as she thought, This feeling is death. On the other side, Lu Sheng was excitedly thrusting the spear while frowning. Lu Sheng shouted in response, "So strong!" She quickly spun the spear into a shield in front of her, blocking Lu Sheng's fierce attack, causing her to be pushed back. Then, Lu Sheng frowned, bracing the spear's shaft against the tip of Lu Sheng's spear while grimacing and shouting in confusion. How can there be such an incredible spear technique? Immediately afterward, Lu Sheng's spear was knocked away in astonishment with just a swing of Lu Sheng's spear. Below the arena, a crowd of students widened their eyes in shock, their faces pale as they shouted, "This is, Teacher Liu has been easily defeated again," the chatter arose. "That's impressive. Did you record it?" Lu Sheng's sharp spear pointed at Su Sin's throat. She swallowed hard, tilting her head back, her expression filled with astonishment as she looked at Lu Sheng. The spear tip remained unwaveringly threatening in her throat. Soon after, Lu Sheng confirmed, "I was too rude." Finally, Lu Sheng smiled, frowning as he watched Liu Sheng retract the spear. Liu Sheng also looked at Lu Sheng in wide-eyed surprise. Lu Sheng supported the spear, his aura continuously surging from his body. The teacher thought, entering the realm. His spear technique is entering the realm. She acknowledged that she could barely withstand 3 strikes before her weapon was directly knocked away. Lu Sheng was still frowning at her, his body exuding a powerful aura. Then Liu Sheng questioned herself, denying her thoughts. No, looking at his relaxed demeanor, it definitely can't just be entering the realm. She then wondered, could it be he has already reached senior control realm? Next, she regained her composure and propped her hands, looking at Lu Sheng, unable to help but commend. "It's surprising that you are so proficient in spear technique, achieving such skill at this age." She confirmed, "You could already graduate from this weaponry class." Right after that, the chatter began to erupt. "What? On the first day of class, he already graduated? I must be crazy." Another student was filming while laughing excitedly, adding to the chaos. "I just recorded this. Posting it on the school's website will definitely scare a lot of people." Beside them, a dissatisfied girl spoke up, "I can't accept this." Another student was pulling his hair, his face darkening as he furrowed his brow in shock and shouted, "Damn it, this is too unreasonable." Then she pointed her index finger at Lu Sheng and commented, "Your spear technique is complete. The only thing missing is practical experience." Finally, she added, "I can sense it. There's no smell of blood on you." After that, Su Sin suggested, "How about this? You go to the mission center to pick up a task, and you can also visit the Marshal Saint Tower and the cold weapon training room." Right afterward, Lu Sheng planted his spear into the ground, causing it to stand upright and shatter a section of the floor. Finally, he clasped his hands together, closed his eyes, and calmly replied, "Thank you, Teacher Liu, for your guidance." Hearing this, she frowned, turned to leave, but still looked at Lu Sheng and confirmed, "Aside from those things, I have nothing else to say." Inside, a scream of dissatisfaction began to rise. On the very first day of class, he could declare his graduation. "I have been a spear technique teacher for many years, and this is the first time I have encountered a monster like him." Next, she looked at herself and voiced her own assessment of her failure. "Compared to him, I guess I'll have to turn into a dog for the second half of my life, haha." Behind her, Lindsay was wide-eyed and sparkling as he raised 2 thumbs up, excitedly shouting, "Brother Shang, so that means you won't usually see me. So this is how it is?" He then exclaimed in awe, "That's amazing." Lu Sheng, seeing that he had understood, smiled and glanced over. Soon afterward, Lu Sheng reached out, patted him on the shoulder, and confirmed with a smile, "If that's the case, I'll head to the mission center first. You stay here and diligently hone your skills." Then Lu Sheng encouraged him, "Do your best. I'll come to visit when I have time." In the distance, Su Sin stood among the students, looking at Lu Sheng, while Lindsay stared blankly after Lu Sheng's departing figure, silently exclaiming in his heart, "He truly is a god among ordinary people." At the mission area, people were chattering excitedly. An A-level mission had 4 slots, but was missing one, while a B-level mission needed a spirit thought master. A young man, walking alongside a girl with a backpack slung over his shoulder, was explaining to her, "Gauze, hemostatic medicine, supplies, rations, and many other things. We need to prepare a little of everything in case we need them later." The girl with a ponytail listened to him attentively. Then she frowned slightly, looking worried, and confirmed, "Is that really necessary? We don't need to go outside for this mission." The young man raised his eyebrows and reminded her, "What if that person randomly finds a deep forest in the mountains and goes in there? Don't complain later." Lu Sheng had also arrived here. He glanced around with a casual demeanor, hands in his pockets, forming a judgment in his mind. "Isn't it great? Let's check if there are any new missions." Next, he looked at the pile of missions on the electronic board, noting the A-rank mission to capture a level 5 martial artist criminal who was fleeing and had committed murder armed. with the potential to kill if necessary, along with several other missions. At the end, there were 2 additional B and C missions. Then he frowned slightly, expressing some regret as he mumbled, "Why are there only missions to capture fleeing criminals? What about strange creatures?" Hearing this, the guy beside him glanced at Lu Sheng with a smile, organizing the documents in hand and asking, "Is this your first time here? In the morning, it's all about bounty missions. The strange creature missions will be announced in the afternoon, while other missions will be available in the evening." After that, the guide asked again, "Are you a new first-year student?" With this new information, Lu Sheng leaned on his hand and stared at the mission board in front of him, realizing of wide eyes. "So that's how it is, then Lu Sheng paused, then raised his hand to confirm, "I'll choose this one first." Soon after, a purple mission paper quickly flew towards him, and he read it, still in a daze. Seeing this, the guide's eyes widened as he pointed at the paper in Lu Sheng's hand, looking a bit panicked, and shouted to confirm, "A purple single mission. This is an AA level mission, are you sure?" In response to Lu Sheng's demeanor, the person rested their chin on their hand, pouting and frowning, eyes squinting with doubt and thought. Does he even understand the difficulty of this mission? If he has realized it, then he should quickly apologize for taking the wrong one. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng raised his hand to touch his chin, nodding while reading the paper and confirming, this mission might not be very suitable." His expression was quite calm. Make a sound. The guide, hearing this, smiled, resting his chin on his hand, glancing over at Lu Sheng and chuckling in agreement. Indeed, soon after, a pile of purple missions flew towards Lu Sheng, causing the person to widen their eyes in surprise at the purple papers. Lu Sheng placed them on the table while looking down in disappointment, wondering if there was a mission higher than AA. The purple papers kept flying towards him, and the guide was also taken aback. Finally, he stood up abruptly, frowning and glaring angrily, shouting, "Student, I warn you, if you're purposely here to cause trouble for me, I will report to the school to deduct your course points." Hearing this, Lu Sheng looked around in confusion and furrowed his brow to confirm, "What's going on? Isn't your place the mission reception window?" The other person also looked at Lu Sheng with suspicion, placing their hand on the stack of purple mission papers on the table. Right after that, he calmly sat under the chair, frowned, waved his hand, and looked at Lu Sheng as he explained. The requirements for mission level A and above need the completed credits of the cold weapon training class and strong practical combat abilities. Then he added, "Have you, as a newly enrolled student, met the requirements yet? How troublesome." Seeing that he didn't believe him, Lu Sheng also calmly looked over and quickly threw his 6-star medal toward him. Immediately, it bounced up and was just right to fly into the hand of the instructor. He frowned too, holding it in confusion. Soon after, his eyes went dark, widened in shock, his brows knitted with fear, and he trembled, clutching Lu Sheng's badge while shouting, "This is a 6th-level martial artist badge." Next, he broke out in a cold sweat, forced a smile, and nervously raised the badge to look at Lu Sheng for confirmation. "Is this yours?" Seeing that he still didn't believe it, Lu Sheng narrowed his eyes and frowned, somewhat angrily clenching his fist fiercely and threateningly said, "Or should I punch you to see if it's real?" Hearing that, the other person quickly placed the badge down, frowning in fear as he looked at Lu Sheng, who had his arms crossed in front of him, and added another condition. The mission requirements also need to achieve the maximum points in the cold weapon class. Hearing that, Lu Sheng pointed at him, his face filled with hostility, and frowned while threatening him. An hour ago, Lu Sheng, the teacher of the spear technique class, had admitted me for graduation. I thought it would be quickly compiled, or you could go check. Seeing this, the person was also frightened and dared not look at Lu Sheng, trembling as he reached out and made a request. "Oh, then you should hand over your student ID and I will register it for you." Immediately after, he awkwardly frowned and looked up at Lu Sheng, forcing a smile and tremblingly accepting the ID, nervously announcing, "A-level missions and above require approval from the school leaders. You can't just claim them." Next, the person looked at Lu Sheng's student ID, quickly widening his eyes in panic. Finally, he fell from his chair, raised his head to look at Lu Sheng, wide-eyed and frowning in shock, shouting in confirmation, "You are Lu Sheng." Lu Sheng saw that he was still dawdling, narrowed his eyes, and frowned in anger, exuding hostility while threatening him. "How much longer are you going to dawdle? Do you think I would report you?" The other person felt Lu Sheng's anger directed at him and panicked internally. Why does he have such a powerful aura? In the end, trembling all over, with tears brimming in the corners of his eyes, sweating profusely, he frowned and awkwardly clutched the ID, shouting in confirmation, "As soon as I receive the review results, I will inform you immediately." Next, he awkwardly closed his eyes, bowed his head, and extended the card and badge towards Lu Sheng, shouting for confirmation, "Please take back the card and badge." Seeing this, Lu Sheng pouted and turned away, glancing back at him, frowning and complaining inwardly, slow as a turtle. Behind him, the guide, flustered, waved at Lu Sheng with a smile. Please visit again next time. After that, Lu Sheng dismissed it and concluded within himself that it was almost mealtime, and he would go check out the Marshal St. Tower in the afternoon. At the same time, Hu Dong wielded a saber, turning his body while controlling the blade and releasing aura. Immediately, the teacher glanced at him and clasped his hands, commenting, "Very good, someone who has never practiced sword technique before can skillfully apply the basic sword technique." Beside him, Hu Dong, being praised, smiled awkwardly and replied, "Thank you, teacher, you flatter me." In the back, the other students frowned and whispered to each other. He must have practiced secretly, right? His family is known for academic excellence, isn't it? Next to them, another person frowned and pointed, asserting, "That's a scam. He must have practiced before. How could the teacher not see that?" They then added, "Hu Dong doesn't show any signs of having trained before." That person quickly responded, "Then he really is talented." Amidst their discussion, he proudly reached for the blazing sword, feeling pleased within, thinking they probably didn't know. His innate ability to grasp the elemental metal naturally made him close to cold weapons. Every martial artist with the innate skill to handle metal was a genius in cold weapons, with no exceptions. Next, Hu Dong smiled with his teeth showing, furrowed his brow, raised his sword to block his face, and stated, "I can even feel the sword in my hand breathing. What about Lu Sheng? He's not here, and I don't believe he could be stronger than me in this regard." The guy with blue hair quickly looked at his phone while furrowing his brow, awkwardly panicking, and shouted, "Holy shit! This is outrageous, really outrageous. Everyone hurry up and check the school website." The friends next to him also quickly widened their eyes, pointing at the phone screen, and yelled, "Oh my god, I can't believe it." Seeing them like that, Hu Dong also looked over, still holding the sword, stunned. One person voiced their opinion, "Lu Sheng, he's no longer human." On the phone screen, Lu Sheng's silhouette appeared with the information. The strongest monster in history. Graduated in 20 minutes, setting a new record for Marshall State University Nov 7. With just 3 attacks, he defeated the instructor of the cold weapon spear technique. How strong is Lu Sheng really? Next was an image of Lu Sheng aiming the spear at Liu Xing with an addition. Spear technique entered the realm Spear Technique Senior Control Realm. The power of Lu Sheng analyzed version 2.0. Hearing this, Hu Dong fell to the ground with a thud. His eyes rolled back in shock. The teacher, seeing this, also knelt down in panic, squinting his eyes, and anxiously called out, "Hu Dong, what's wrong with you?" His eyes shimmered with tears flowing down in deep pain. "Teacher, I want to change my subject." In another arena, Chen Yixuan was practicing swordsmanship inside the courtyard. His face was scrunched up with sweat as he swung the sword. Then, he calmly closed his eyes and sheathed the sword. Behind him, the stone also quickly shattered. Next to him, a girl clapped her hands and smiled, complimenting him. "Impressive Yixuan." She then remarked, "The power of the green dragon slash technique has become much stronger than before." Chen Yixuan stood silently, holding his sword. The girl leaned against the wall, smiling, and remarked, "Xiao Nan has come to challenge you again. It might not take more than 100 moves for you to defeat him." Then he took a glass of water, brought it to his mouth, and drank with his eyes closed, stating, "Xiao Nan is merely a loser." With his sword in hand, he added, "He has long been out of my consideration." The girl quickly offered a towel to Chen Yixuan. Then his eyes shone with determination as he frowned and confirmed, "My target is those in the top 10 of the Marshall Saint rankings." Finally, he stated, "Only they are worthy enough to be my opponents." She tilted her head, crossed her arms, and looked at Chen Yixuan with a smile, commenting, "With your current strength, you should be strong enough to enter the top 10 of the Marshall Saint rankings, right?" Beside her, Chen Yixuan heard her question, raised his sword, furrowed his brow, and replied, "Not yet. I still haven't condensed a trace of martial will that belongs to me." He added, "So I haven't had the opportunity yet." The girl with 2 braids also frowned at this, smiled wryly, and reached out to look at Chen Yixuan. The gap from level 6 to level 7 has trapped countless people, even top martial arts geniuses. Ultimately, stating things here will only waste a considerable amount of time to enlighten oneself and seek a way out. Becoming a master is not that easy to achieve. Instead of talking about self-ability, it's more accurate to say it's about luck. Hearing this, Chen Yixuan's expression darkened. As he listened to her, he tightened his grip on the sword even more, furrowed his brow, and closed his eyes to confirm, "You're right. Perhaps the opportunity hasn't come yet." Suddenly, she seemed to remember something and held her phone up towards Chen Yixuan, exclaiming, "Oh, right. I discovered a very interesting new student today. Let me show you." Hearing this, Chen Yixuan wiped his face and glanced at the phone in her hand. Then the girl with two braids spoke up to explain. It's him. His name is Lu Sheng. He is a fresh student who just enrolled a few days ago, and I've heard he is the ascending dragon martial poinsettia this year. On the screen is a picture of Lu Sheng. She added, on the first day of the elective cold weapon class, he directly defeated Teacher Liu. Teacher Liu was too careless. Seeing this, Chen Yixuan quickly grabbed her phone and frowned. Teacher Liu has reached the mid-stage of the spear technique, and her strength is considered quite strong among the teachers. She then added, even if there was a lapse, the result wouldn't change at all. The girl with the two buns shouted an explanation. This freshman named Lu Sheng is very strong. His spear technique level has at least reached the high stage of the entry realm, or even the peak entry realm. He might even have touched the threshold of the senior control realm. Chen Yixuan, while observing, frowned and squinted at the screen. Then she leaned down with her hands on her hips, raising one hand to cover her mouth and squinting with a teasing smile. Hee. The top student among the old students like you, seeing such a formidable new generation, she continued to ask, do you feel any pressure or danger in your heart? Meanwhile, Chen Yixuan remained still, holding her sword and phone, watching Lu Sheng on the screen. Finally, he smiled, turned his head, and tossed the phone to the girl, causing her to awkwardly reach out to catch it. Then he commented, haha, did you think I was just wandering around for 4 years at Martial Saint? No. 7. The realm is the realm, and real combat is real combat. He further explained, not everyone is qualified to be an opponent of Chen Yixuan. Shortly after, he squinted, furrowed his brows, and pursed his lips, thinking, but this person named Lu Sheng is indeed a bit unusual. Perhaps I'll encounter him soon. At that moment, Lu Sheng was walking through the campus, hands in his pockets, when he was called to attention. Is this Mr. Lu Sheng? A group of people who were moving items also addressed Lu Sheng. We are the ones sent by Director He to transfer the items. Then, while holding the documents and reaching toward the items being carried by 2 people, they added, please sign here to confirm. Seeing their efforts, he smiled and lifted his hand to handle the items, confirming, I am Lu Sheng. Thank you for your hard work. The group, seeing this, let go of their grip, somewhat startled. Lu Sheng thought to himself, this is the ascending dragon gift from He Ping Nan. Shortly after, he opened the box, revealing a fiery lance rising up. The delivery staff were also taken aback. Lu Sheng continued to control both the box and the spear. Right after that, Lu Sheng lifted his head, holding the blazing lance in his hand, looking joyfully up. The delivery person smiled and reached out to introduce himself. The body of this lance is forged from a large amount of thick and sharp silver, blended with extremely rare pure gold. Next, it is supplemented with a spearhead made from molten lava. It uses a special steel alloy mixed with a large amount of thick and sharp silver and a small amount of pure gold. A cold weapon of master level, the long spear, a level 7 crimson star dragon patterned spear. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng was also very excited, swinging the lance in his hand, his big round eyes sparkling, a broad smile on his face making a remark in his thoughts. This signature weapon attracts a lot of attention, just like a plus 12 weapon. Then he quickly placed his hand on his left chest, smiled at the delivery person, and leaned the spear against the ground, saying, Director He's gift is indeed quite substantial. He then asked, please convey my message that I really like it. The delivery person nodded with a smile in response, confirming, then we'll take our leave. Soon after, they got into their vehicle and departed while Lu Sheng watched their figures from behind, resting his hand on the spear. Then he looked back at the lance and smiled happily, gripping it tightly, declaring, with this crimson star dragon patterned spear, my combat power will definitely increase by at least 30%. He added, the most important thing is to combine it with my innate elemental control skills of natural breathing method. I am confident I can fight with masters. Next, Lu Sheng tried to spin the spear, smiling as he practiced. Sparks flew around him, forming thoughts in his mind. The next thing he needed to do was quickly familiarize himself with this crimson star dragon patterned spear. Then he recalled Zhao Lingquan had once said, building a relationship between a person and the spear will nurture a lance with a soul, which will be 100 times stronger than an ordinary weapon. Flashes of aura quickly coalesced into a ribbon. Lu Sheng determined that the method of nurturing was incredibly simple, then interrupted himself. Finally, as he slammed the spear's butt on the ground, causing the earth to tremble, he internally confirmed that he had practiced many times and shed blood to awaken its power. Next, he tightened his grip on the lance, his eyes shining with a golden light, while an aura of golden brilliance surrounded him. He used the breath of fire, entering an intelligent state. Lu Sheng firmly concluded in his mind, it is not ordinary blood, but the blood of strong enemies. Only through true life and death battles, using their flesh, souls, and wills as food, can one nurture the strength of the divine. Not long after, his expression turned blank. He furrowed his brows, his eyes wide with panic, and he weakly shouted, "What, waiting in line?" In front of the tower was a crowd of students packed tightly together. Lu Sheng, holding his tools, stood by witnessing the scene while muttering, "Are the students of Martial Saint and the Martial Saint Tower really required to register and wait for announcements?" Lu Sheng wondered with uncertainty. Seeing Lu Sheng's naivety, the guide, while filing her nails, calmly remarked, "It's obvious. Do you know how many people apply to enter the Martial Saint Tower every day?" She asked Lu Sheng, then immediately provided the answer herself. At least over 1,000 people. Hearing this, Lu Sheng turned to look at her. Next, she held a nail file while squinting and disdainfully introduced, "The Martial Saint Tower has a total of 30 rooms and only 30 people can enter at a time. Being a student of Martial Saint already gives you an advantage." She then added, "Those martial artists outside have to get approval from the Martial Arts Association before they can come here and wait in line. Just getting in once a year would make them jump for joy." Seeing this, Lu Sheng also turned to look at her and asked, "So how long do I have to wait until I can go in?" In response to his question, the guide shrugged and closed her eyes, saying, "Well, it depends on how long the person inside can hold on." Then she announced, "There are over 200 students waiting ahead of you. If everything goes quickly, it will take about 3 days. Upon hearing this announcement, he also closed his eyes and sighed gloomily. Fine. Finally resigned, he requested, "Please let me know when the time comes." Seeing him like this, the guide rested her chin on her hand, leaned against the table, and waved at him, confirming, "Since you're so handsome, I'll let you know as soon as I can." Then she reminded him, "But it's best to come within 10 minutes of receiving the notification, or you will have to wait even longer for your turn." As Lu Sheng turned to leave, he looked at her while holding his tools. Then, as he walked, he glanced at the tower, his expression somber as he concluded, "No wonder there are so many people. In the end, expressing their martial will in the Martial Saint Tower really does yield different reactions." Soon after, he noted to himself that he could feel an enormous surge of power like he had never experienced before. The tower in front of him radiated a golden light, and his body was absorbed into it. Lu Sheng commented further, "A will as vast and solid as high mountains and wide rivers. The will of a grandmaster in my mind compared to this path of will is like a firefly compared to the bright moon. Its brilliance is unmatched." After returning to reality, he furrowed his brow, narrowed his eyes, and looked up at the tower, seriously shouting in his heart, "Is the gap between a 7th level master and a 9th level martial saint really that big?" Next, he also turned his head, calmly leaving while confirming in his heart. He walked away, not in a hurry, and then made a decision. The rarer the resources, the more people will need them, which is very normal. So today he went to the cold weapon training room to familiarize himself with the new weapon a bit. The people in the waiting hall of the training room smiled and tilted their heads to look at Lu Sheng, pointing upwards sympathetically and announcing, "Sorry, all the rooms are currently occupied." Hearing this, Lu Sheng felt helpless, his eyes wide with gloom as if he had just lost money. Finally, he lay down on the ground in dissatisfaction, spread his arms out helplessly, and shouted in his heart, "Life really is inconvenient. Am I so unlucky that I bit my tongue while drinking soup?" Seeing this, the receptionist quickly stood up, worried, and called out to Lu Sheng, "Student." Meanwhile, Lu Sheng remained lost in his thoughts, expressing his dissatisfaction by asking himself, "Why did the 7th level martial saints have so many students? Wasn't it said that the average area per person would be up to 100 mu?" In the end, Lu Sheng got up, stood up abruptly, and while turning around gloomily to leave, he confirmed, "All right, it seems today is truly a day not to go out." Seeing this, the girl also looked at Lu Sheng's departing back and reminded him, "Remember to come early next time before 7 o'clock. Next, she looked at the notice board and exclaimed, "Ah!" Immediately, she left the reception area full of joy, raised her card, grabbed Lu Sheng's wrist, and called back, "Wait a minute, classmate Lu Sheng." Seeing this, Lu Sheng also stopped in his tracks, turned his head, narrowed his eyes at her, listening in confusion. The receptionist added, "Someone just left. I'll add you in right away. Hurry over there." At the girl's enthusiasm, he couldn't help but look at her in surprise and ask back, "Oh, do I know you?" In response to this question, the girl smiled widely, showing her teeth and held her card up while answering, He, who doesn't know you now? Your video on the school website is super hot." Right after that, he took his gear while accepting the card and bowed his head to express his thanks. "Thank you for helping me." Seeing this, the girl also released her hand from his, smiled, waved her hand dismissively, and said, "It's nothing. Go ahead, good luck." She then announced, "Training room number 8 is the 4th room on the left side over there." As soon as Lu Sheng left, the receptionist turned her head back, smiled at Lu Sheng, and thought to herself, The internet says Lu Sheng looks like a scary demon king, but I find him quite polite. Then she rubbed her chin and smiled at him with great interest, asking herself, I wonder if his strength is really that exaggerated, so curious. As soon as Lu Sheng entered the training room, he opened his spear, which had been disassembled into pieces in the suitcase he held, confirming it in his mind. It was his first time in the training room, and he wondered how much of the training he would be able to complete. Next, the spear was reassembled. Lu Sheng gripped the spear tightly in his hand, and then he spun it around, pointing the tip of the spear down towards the ground as he prepared himself in a powerful stance. In training room number 8, Lu Sheng stood in front of the door with the suitcase, looking up at the tall door while wondering, is this the place? Soon after, the door opened and he took the suitcase in his hand and stepped inside, glancing around. Lu Sheng's face was filled with curiosity as he took another look around and muttered to himself, it looks very similar to the movement skill training room at the Genius training camp. It seems like the training will be similar too. Next, Lu Sheng's gaze landed on a device mounted on the wall in the room. He quickly reached out and pressed the device and a beep sounded. Immediately, a simulated environment was created. The sound of machinery announced, Stage 1 of cold weapon training will begin. Please prepare. Electromagnetic wave lines surrounded Lu Sheng and he stared in a daze, somewhat surprised. Next, Lance was surrounded and began to ignite. His entire body also shone with flames. Spear lunged back, its tip aimed at the ground, ready to enter a fighting stance while looking toward the device. Inside, the gaps in the walls quickly puffed out round orbs. Shortly after, they sped toward Lu Sheng, who remained completely calm, glancing at them, while Spear stayed still. Then his eyes flashed as he turned his head up with a murderous intent toward the small orbs. Finally, with a speed astonishing like a clone, Lu Sheng wielded Spear, slicing the small orbs in half, so fast that they created shivering golden ribbons, then landing precisely on the ground as he swung Spear upward. Next, the fragments of the orbs fell to the ground in succession. Lu Sheng looked up, frowning in confusion, and casually asked, is it really that simple? Following that, the system announced that the training had ended. Hearing this, Lu Sheng clenched his fists, and with the other hand still holding Spear, he looked up in surprise. Immediately afterward, the system released another announcement. Achievement. Completion of Stage 1 training at 20%. Seeing the notification displayed, Lu Sheng widened his eyes, furrowing his brow in disbelief, grunting softly. Then he internally shouted in confusion, why does this feel like a failure? What's going on? In response to Lu Sheng's questions, the system promptly announced, during the training, the use of any means outside of bodily energy is strictly prohibited, including staunch spirit, elemental powers, and many other things. Lu Sheng also looked up at the system board and read. Finally, Lu Sheng stood up straight, his eyes fixed on the system as he waved the spear, the tip of the spear pointing down toward the ground while he shouted his confirmation internally. So that's how it is. It makes sense. If I could use staunch spirit in conjunction with a melee weapon to sweep through an area, it would completely defeat the purpose of training. Next, he added, training and technique can only use physical energy. Immediately after, he shouted with determination to the system, do it again. In response to Lu Sheng's command, the system promptly launched a new series of round spheres, while Lu Sheng quickly bent down and swung the spear into a preparatory stance. Next, Lu Sheng swiftly swung the spear, slicing through the spheres with his muscular strength, performing various forms and stances. Finally, Lu Sheng landed on the ground, simply propping himself up, and the fragments of the spheres quickly fell to the ground. Immediately after, Lu Sheng looked up, squinting his eyes, and raised his hand to wipe the sweat off his face, stating, I didn't expect that using just muscular strength would make me sweat like this. The first wave seemed to have ended, but life is not a dream. The spheres were swiftly launched again. Seeing this relentless onslaught, Lu Sheng gritted his teeth and glared at the spears, shouting in dissatisfaction, is it still the same as before? Next, Lu Sheng waved his spear while staring blankly at the balloons that did not follow the old rules, shouting in his heart, it's not right. The following day, Lu Sheng watched the balloons glide past him, astonished and confused, and remarked that these were not the same seeds from before. They are easily blown away by the wind. They are wooden seeds. Then Lu Sheng quickly waved the spear, stabilizing himself on the ground while shouting his observation. Indeed, this is a technique that martial artists need to practice in a cold weapon training room. The experience required is to utilize and control cold weapons. Finally, Lu Sheng moved the spear in circular motions like the cold winds, gently controlling these easily windswept balloons, and concluded in his heart, iron and steel turning into wood, it seems the damage and speed have both decreased, making it easier. But in reality, it's the opposite. The lighter the seeds shot out, the simpler they were affected by the airflow, and he added, if I haven't even struck and yet there's a chance of being pushed back. The The sword, the spear, blown away. Even if they aren't blown away, their trajectory will become completely unpredictable. Next, Lu Sheng closed his eyes, feeling and sarcastically commenting, "This time it resembles what the martial arts novels from my past life described." Finally, the tip of the spear struck a wooden seed. Lu Sheng further remarked, "Picking flowers and flying leaves, drawing the sword to cup water, while the other balloons continued to drift aimlessly around." Finally, Lu Sheng muttered, "What's next?" While waving the spear and slashing around, Lu Sheng pondered the plastic ball, then moved on to other things that were hit, along with popcorn flowers. Next came the tiny, delicate feathers drifting aimlessly. Lu Sheng paused momentarily, holding the spear in his hand, looked, and then stared in astonishment, rushing forward with a bit of surprise. Lu Sheng shouted, "It's feathers again this time." The feathers rolled together and fell aimlessly. He could vividly imagine their shape as they moved. Then, narrowing his eyes with a fierce expression, he furrowed his brows and shouted in confirmation, "So that's how it is." Immediately after, Lu Sheng swung the spear, throwing it towards the feathers, furrowing his brows and glaring as he surged forward. The feathers quickly separated due to the wind. Soon, his spear spun, aiming to approach a feather falling in midair. In the end, his face darkened as he retracted the spear, then, feeling annoyed, swung it up again, frowning, grinding his teeth in frustration for missing. The feathers continued to dance in the dust, and he could still feel the fire within, gripping the spear tightly, frowning, his gaze resolute as he looked at the feathers. His face darkened as he held the spear to seriously assess his thoughts. A few brief moments of cultivation in the cold weapon training room, his understanding of the Crimson Star Dragon patterned spear was deepening. If this pace continued, he would soon be able to cultivate his intuition, smoothly progressing to the next stage of soul nurturing. His body was still engulfed in flames.